Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Life from the Wrist. Hope you are doing well today. I think the stories behind watches and the significance that they have in individuals, people's lives, is what makes them special to me, the provenance of them. And so today we're going to be looking at a book. It's called A Man and His Watch, written by Matt Hranek. This book documents a variety of watches in all shapes, sizes, and ages, and why they are significant to their owners. There are some fairly iconic watches that are discussed in this book, like Sir Edmund Hillary's Oyster Perpetual, one of the first Omega Speedmasters in space, Paul Newman's Daytona, but other watches like Ben Clymer's Speedmaster. And so the idea is to cover iconic watches and stories from the men who wore them. I think this is a really excellent book if you are looking to add something to your sort of watch-related book collection. If you enjoy the provenance of specific pieces or just want to read about some iconic watches, this is a great book to look at. So I'm going to give you an overview of the book and then show you just some sections of it. I'm not going to go through it page by page, but it's kind of the typical format that I do for all of the books that I cover on this channel. So without further ado, let me flip perspectives so you can take a look at this book. Alright, super excited to jump into A Man and His Watch. This book is honestly the epitome of what I find interesting in watches. I find them to be objects that can tell stories and have a very significant part to play in the histories of individuals, in companies, in the lives of those around us. And A Man and His Watch, iconic watches and stories from the men who wore them, is a perfect example of that. This book was written by Matt Hranek. It was published, I believe, in 2017, and is a book that basically takes a lot of watches from the histories of the lives of those watch collectors around us and tells the stories of them. I have two watches here that sort of maybe play that part in my life. We have this memo sale, which was actually my first vintage watch purchase ever. And so clearly it has if I can get it into focus, clearly it has a significant part to play in sort of my history. I then have this really interesting Bulova 23 jewel watch with a shield case from the 1960s that I think is so cool. And while I don't know the exact story behind this watch, I do think that it's going to play a very important part in my life as well. Let's just get into focus here so you can see it and what I've sort of been describing. Yeah. So, as mentioned, this book was released a couple of years ago, and so there's a couple places you can buy it, Amazon, Hodinkee being one of them. Hodinkee actually describes it this way. Every watch tells a story. Might sound like an old cliche, but in A Man and His Watch, author Matt Hranek proves that when it's true, the results are something special. Speaking with people from diverse careers and with different horological interests, the author introduces us to an artist who has been wearing the same digital watch for 20 years, a race car driver who with a small collection of trophy watches from his storied career, a chef whose prized timepiece was a special anniversary gift. What ties all of these men together is that the watch they put on their wrist every day carries immense personal significance and is a small totem of who they are, where they have been, and where they hope to go. Through the stories of watches, and with photographer Stephen Lewis's big, beautiful images, we get small insight full biographies of the characters who own them. So yeah, it's essentially a book that goes into the stories behind some of the most iconic watches, iconic watches for individuals. So this sort of reads Paul Newman's Rolex Daytona, a gift from his wife, Joanne Woodward; astronaut Wally Schirra's Omega Speedmaster, which became the first watch to travel to the moon. Let's see if I can get it to focus here. The Gold Submariner that Sylvester Stallone bought when he knew he'd made it. Nas's Gold Patek Philippe, an expression of his singular style. The Rolex Oyster Perpetual that Sir Edmund Hillary wore when he summited Everest. Whether it's a timepiece at the pinnacle of artistry, and precision of it, or a small watch layered with sentimental value, there's always a story. I think this obviously rings true with Life on the Wrist and what it's about, and that's why I think it's really cool. So to get into the book a little bit, I'll show you a couple of the pages, but really what I want to focus on is just a high-level overview of it. So you've got a man and his watch. You can obviously see this outline of a watch that's sort of etched into this this cover. It has a really cool texture to it, and it looks basically like a Rolex Daytona. If you flip it over, there were some watches that on the back of it that you can see. You see a Cartier, an Omega Speedmaster, and a Rolex Explorer, and a Hoyer Carrera. And this is sort of like the outside sleeve, so as you can see, the crown of the Daytona is sort of there, and then as you take this off, you are shown this really incredible Rolex Daytona non-Paul Newman dial. So I'll put this on the side for now, and get more into sort of the book itself. So Rolex Daytona on the front. If we flip it over to the back, you can see Drive Slowly Joanne. This is clearly the Daytona that was owned by Paul Newman. You can see that what's really cool is there's actually some little bit of texture on the watch, kind of between where you would imagine the bezel and the crystal would be. And then as you open it, you can see that the photography of this watch is what really makes it stand out. So you can see your opening pages. Right here it says, "For my father." And as we keep going, here's a table of contents. So you've got various stories that are described in this, and the people who sort of have them. What's really cool is while there's all these stories, they also have sections about from the archive. So there's this from the archive about Rolex. There's, I believe, a from the archive about Cartier, Tag Heuer, Omega, Hermes, Zenith, and so there's different sections that you can go through here and see some really amazing watches. As I do with all these, I'm not going to go through the whole book, but I'll give you a little bit of a flavor. So you have your table of contents here. We then have this really beautifully written preface by the author, where he describes his father's Rolex Oyster Perpetual Datejust with a steel bezel with a black dial. As you can see, the pictures of this are absolutely phenomenal. What I really like about this book, and something that I think makes it really easy to consume, is the fact that the stories are not super extensive. I've only seen them sort of span 2 or 3 pages. So really nice sort of opening example from the author himself, and really beautifully photographed watches. There's obviously a section here about Paul Newman's 6263, which is what you see on the front and back of the watch. Excuse me, of the book. We then have each of the watches that are sort of significant. So you can see this is Eric Rippert's story about his Vacheron Constantin Historique Américain 1921, who is a chef and co-owner of La Bernardine. And so you have a beautiful photo of it and sort of a description of how he came about the watch and why it's significant to him. As you can see, 2 pages with a quote from that page. And there are many different examples of this. This is one of the examples from which is about from the archives, which talks about a Rolex Oyster Perpetual that Francis Chisters wore when he sailed from, when he, if I sort of read from here, when he left Plymouth, England in 1966, this Rolex was strapped to his wrist, and when he returned on May 28th, 1967, after 226 days of sailing with just a single stop in Sydney, Australia, the very watch was with him, functioning perfectly, a concrete testimony to the unique skill of the Rolex artists and craftsmen in Geneva, Switzerland. So he circumnavigated the globe with one of these in a boat. Is another example, Mario Andretti's sort of like collection that was mentioned in the summary. You can see a couple of his specific watches here. this is an iconic watch, and if you know watches at all, I think you know Ben Clymer's Speedmaster and sort of the story about it, and so he's also featured here. But this continues. Here's a from the archive from Cartier with an absolutely beautiful Cartier watch here in a tonneau case shape. A really beautiful, which I actually didn't know existed, a reversible Cartier dress watch, which piqued my interest for sure. This is Fred Astaire's Cartier that he was a gift from him to his racehorse trainer, and he sort of has this beautiful inscription on the back. But this sort of concept continues throughout this entire book, and you can see the range of watches. You can see some vintage pieces, you can see some modern pieces. Here's a dive piece, but you have dress pieces as well, Rolex, and so you have such diverse watches that are sort of described in this book. I'm going to skip a little bit here so you can see it. And I think what's really significant here is there really is no right way of collecting watches. There are watches that are sort of, significant to you, and they have a reason for being significant to you. And that's what every single one of the pieces that is described in this book is kind of about. It's significant to someone out there because of the story that they led with it. And, life on the wrist, I hope it's self-explanatory, but the idea is that it's these types of stories that make these watches really special. And so if you just keep going here, you can see the real range of the different watches. And there's obviously a contributor section and a section back at the end where you can reference certain things. So a really amazing book, beautiful photography. I really love the lengths of the stories because I think they could be quite lengthy, but enough for you to get the idea of what the story was with that watch and how it was significant to the author. If you are interested in like the provenance of watches and maybe the stories behind them, this is a book for you. If you like Life on the Wrist, this is a book that I think it perfectly complements what I try and do here. So I encourage you to pick it up and add it to your book collection. With that said, guys, I will flip perspectives so we can close out this video. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at a man and his watch, iconic watches and the stories from the men who wore them. As I mentioned, I think this book really hits home with what my goal was with Life on the Wrist when I first started it. It's really about the provenance of watches. It's about the stories and the significance of those individual watches with the people who own them and wear them. I think those stories are the ones that make you put a watch on your wrist and say, you know what, I think this is a part of my life and will forever be a part of my life. So I encourage you to check out this book if you don't have it already. I know it's been out for a little while now, but I definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't done so. Let me know what you think about this book. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you want to check out some of the other books that we've covered on the channel, just look at the previously uploaded videos on our YouTube channel. You can also go to our website, lifeonthewrist.com, and go to the editorial section if you want to see some of the articles. We'll have an article about this book where we'll go into it as well. So I encourage you to check that out. If you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel if you are new here and sharing this video with a friend who is interested in watches, love to have you part of the channel. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on this video, it really does help me out. With that said, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and until next time.